Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising today with a heavy heart in support of emergency measures to restore order in a situation that has steadily been getting out of hand. The convoy movement has clearly come to mean many things to many different people, but it matters, I think, that the stated intention of the organizers has been to disrupt and overthrow Canada's democratic institutions, as outlined in their published Memorandum of Understanding and their discussions in the media. A lack of leadership by the federal government and local police in Ottawa have led us to a point of crisis. Coupled with the discovery of weapon caches, allegations by authorities of conspiracy to commit murder, reports of involvement by elite military members, and the prolonged harassment of people in their homes and places of work, there can be no question that this has to stop. The status quo is unacceptable and can't be allowed to continue. The failure of the Ottawa police so far to bring an end to the occupation and the persistence of border blockades until the declaration of emergency measures show that additional measures are necessary to break the logjam. I'm glad that all the border crossings have reopened in the last several days, and I look forward to the end of the illegal occupation of Ottawa, an end that I hope comes swiftly and peacefully. There have been many protests in Canada over the last 34 years since the Emergency Measures Act was developed as an alternative to the War Measures Act. None of them have resulted in a prolonged, weeks-long occupation of the nation's capital city. None of them have been characterized, as this one is, by the active and sustained harassment of residents in their homes, on the street, and in their places of work. The fact that many Canadians are feeling legitimate fatigue because of the pandemic challenges we have all had to suffer doesn't excuse this behavior. The fact that many Canadians share a desire with convoy organizers to lift public health measures doesn't absolve the organizers of responsibility for their undemocratic objectives. The fact that most Canadians fed up with vaccine mandates and passports do not support white supremacy or endorse messages of hate does not make the small number of Canadians who do any less dangerous in this volatile time. I believe that there are many Canadians who are frustrated and tired of the pandemic who have sympathy for the convoy because they want to see an end to certain public health measures, and that the overwhelming majority of them do not support the extremist views and objectives of the convoy organizers. It's very important that there be space in our country for debate about the issues of the day. In our day, that includes the nature and extent of public health measures. For my part, I believe that the discussion should be led by public health officials on the basis of the best available information. I've been consistent in that position since the outset of the pandemic, and I'll continue to be, even as I respect the right of others to disagree. There are many Canadians who want to have a discussion about public health measures, including vaccine mandates and passport systems. There is room for this discussion in a democracy, and the right to engage in those conversations has to be protected. Ending the illegal occupations and stopping the extremists who have their own undemocratic political agenda is necessary to make space for that legitimate debate and protest. It may also create space for Dr. Tam to undertake the review of public health measures that she hinted at on February 4th and have largely been expected to come after the Omicron wave, even before the convoy left for Ottawa. Making changes to public health orders while the occupation persists is not advisable, in my opinion, because it would encourage people to think that public policy can be set by intimidation and the threat of violence. Capitulation doesn't work. In Winnipeg, where the Manitoba Conservatives announced a sudden change to public health orders in response to the convoy, demonstrators are still set up downtown, even though the province has said all public health measures will be lifted within the next several weeks. In my day, I've been part of many different political demonstrations and supported many different causes. I've seen police clear out demonstrations of people protesting against free trade agreements, against racism, and in defense of Indigenous rights far more quickly and far more brutally, despite there being truly peaceful demonstrations. I recall not that long ago in Winnipeg, in 2020, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder at the hands of police, a demonstration attended by thousands of people at the legislature. I remember organizers in the lead up to that event publicly communicating that violent demonstrators were not welcome. I remember them working to make a plan for the demonstration that would make it hard for anyone who wanted to hijack it with violent or hateful acts. And it was a successful demonstration with many many people who made their point and went home and then have continued to be involved in all sorts of continuing anti-racism activity, including protests and demonstrations. But they didn't occupy downtown Winnipeg for weeks on end. And we've seen even, camps of homeless who have nowhere else to go get cleared out in no time by police simply for being in some of the same spaces that are being occupied now in downtown Winnipeg. Wasn't a problem to clear out the homeless. I don't know why it is that it's acceptable to allow folks to set up in the way that they have when others who are just seeking to live in some kind of community get cleared out. But I was talking just earlier about the demonstration surrounding George Floyd's death in Winnipeg. I think that's what responsible political organizing committed to peaceful protest looks like. It takes work, and there are people who do that work, and you can tell in their public messages. I haven't seen that kind of leadership from the organizers of these occupations, and I have to say, if any efforts have been made, they certainly have not been effective. I was pleased last Thursday when the member for Portage-Lisgar, an interim leader of the Conservative Party, finally called for the convoy to go home. But they haven't gone home. The Ottawa police have shown they can't be trusted to send them home. And so we have to have additional measures to move them along. I agree that the Prime Minister has done a terrible job as a leader through this crisis. While it's right to call out proponents of hate and extremists in the crowd and in the ranks of the organizers, it's wrong to lump in the far larger group of Canadians tired with public health measures into that group. And it hasn't served our national dialogue. It hasn't served our country. It hasn't served our body politic. I'd be remiss if I didn't note that the Conservatives have been engaging in their own brand of politics on these issues. The Conservative government in Manitoba was the first to implement a vaccine passport system, but federal Conservatives never showed up on the steps of the legislature to oppose that system. Leaked letters show that the interim Conservative leader has been more concerned to make this a political problem for the Prime Minister than to help the country find a way to de-escalate and get out of this. And while there is absolutely a serious responsibility on the part of the Prime Minister to provide that leadership, there is also responsibility on others in this House, particularly the leader of the official opposition. Leaked letters have also showed that the Conservative Premier of Manitoba has been happy to beg the Prime Minister to intervene privately while criticizing his intervention publicly. What I'm trying to say, Mr. Speaker, is that there's a lot of different political agendas at work in and around the convoy. But the upshot is that the people of Ottawa are being terrorized in their homes for weeks now, while the country careens toward a level of political instability we haven't seen in my lifetime. And that's why it really is time for the convoy to go home. That doesn't mean it's time for the discussion around public health measures to end, but it means that those who want to demonstrate and those who want to protest have to start doing that in a way. And I know there have been many who have done this in a peaceful way, but like the organizers of other protests I was referring to earlier, there has to be an effort to root out the violence and the extremists and those who are intimidating people in Ottawa. That has to become far more a part of the public message of this convoy in order for the real issues that people are concerned about and on which, they may not agree with me, but that's okay. But if they want that message to be heard, then their political organizing has to take a very different shape than the shape that it has taken in the convoy. So I appeal to all those Canadians who I know are perhaps frustrated and angry with me because I haven't called for an end to all public health measures right now, because I prefer to defer to public health officials on this point. But I would call for them in their good spirit and in their good faith to start actively calling on the convoy organizers to promote peace, to dislodge themselves from downtown Ottawa and anywhere else that they're hanging on, and then to engage in the kinds of peaceful protests that Canada knows very well. And I think that's how we get this dialogue back on track and create a path to unity in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Scarborough-Rouge Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for that very thoughtful intervention. I do want to just highlight a number of speakers have suggested that the Prime Minister meet with those who are illegally blocking Parliament Hill and engage in dialogue with them. I just want him to reflect, my friend opposite to reflect, and maybe give us a sense of why that's not possible, why political engagement at that level is inappropriate, just given what's out there right now.
Honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think it makes sense for a Prime Minister to meet with a group who has a stated objective of displacing a democratically elected government with some kind of self-appointed committee and the Governor General and the Senate. I mean, I read the MOU and I thought it was ridiculous. Unfortunately, it sounded so ridiculous that I think too many people, including people in the Ottawa Police Force and the government, failed to take the threat that these folks represent to stability seriously. And I think there's a lot of Canadians who have supported them in good faith without taking that part of it seriously. But that part of it and the determination that that represents has been a big part of why this has been such an obstinate protest and why it's been so hard to dislodge. And that's the part that we now need to deal with.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask the member a question. What test has been met in order to justify this extreme measure? The former NDP Member of Parliament, Sven Robinson, has said, I was in the House during the 1988 debate on the Act when we were promised that emergency powers can only be used when the situation is so drastic that no other law of Canada can deal with the situation. The test has not been met. NDP, can you stop this? It's clear from the member's speech they're not going to stop this. What is happening in Ottawa that regular laws cannot deal with? We saw all the other blockades at borders removed with existing laws. What's the specific law that has to come into place to take care of something that's been taken care of elsewhere?
The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, first of all, I would note that some of those border blockades were only cleared out once the state of emergency had been declared. And so I do think that in some of those cases, this declaration has played a role in having those clear out. And secondly, I would note that for as much as there may be powers under existing laws to clear out Ottawa, the Ottawa Police Force hasn't done it. So something in the context needs to change. And so, you know, this is how we get to the position that we're in. I wish we had had a more unified call across party lines early in the convoy to send the message that they should all go home. Instead, we saw a lot of people in this place encourage them. And we're now, which is not to say that they shouldn't be giving voice to the legitimate questions about public health measures, even where there's disagreement between the NDP and those folks who hold views about.
Question et commentaire. Questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to our colleague from Elmwood-Transcona. So I've been a bit surprised since yesterday to watch the NDP talk about these values that are really part of their DNA. You know, the NDP is a humanist social democrat party, and so I don't understand their approach on this issue. But my question is this. The current decree will be voted upon on Monday. A couple of hours ago, we heard the Ottawa Chief of Police saying that this weekend will not be like the other weekends. He also said that he will be able to clear out Ottawa to a certain degree. So given that context, is it still appropriate for us to be spending the next 3 days debating the Emergencies Act to potentially arrive at with an order on Monday that won't have its place anymore. The honourable member.
Oui, je pense que c'est...
Yes, I think that it's still important that we spend the next 3 days having this debate. Because even if the NDP is ready to support these measures due to a failure of leadership that led us to this moment, this debate is important. It's important that members of Parliament be able to express themselves on this issue and be able to guide the actions of the coming days and months. So I think this debate is important regardless of what happens this weekend.
Trees du débat continuing.